Hello, we are live. Thank you so much for joining us, for keep on coming back, whether we've just appeared on your screen or you've registered to see this event. Thank you so much for supporting Joe and I on our quest to answer the question, can recruitment crack inequality? We obviously think it can, but we are absolutely thrilled today to be joined by the twosome that is Belonging Base, Danielle and Sophie Wood. We're here to celebrate, we are here to support, we are here to bring awareness to Trans Awareness Week. Danielle will, when she comes back online, let you know that her internet is very unstable, but we're going to just waltz our way through this anyway. But yeah, thank you so much. Over to you, Joe. I know that you have got lots of, a passion for trans rights and a lot to say on the subject. So I want to pass over to you. I'm going to bring Danielle back in. I'm going to remove her stage and bring her back in. But Joe,
the joy of being live.
Lost me already.
Lost you already. Absolutely.
Thanks, Sally. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and also, to having like this, the real privilege of talking and listening to Danielle and Sophie. From my perspective, I think that, we see a lot of noise and a lot of activity around inclusion and supporting the LGBTQ plus community as a whole, but I often find that when I talk about this a lot, the T tends to be missing from a strategic perspective, and from a place where we actually really listen to that community, to the community, and include them in the conversation about the work that we're doing, right? And I think that's something we often overlook. It's kind of, well, we've got this broader community and we'll make lots and lots of decisions on inclusion for the trans community without actually consulting. And I know that's not just maybe an employer recruitment industry kind of challenge. It's a broader politically social policy challenge as well. And I just want to see, I want to see more spaces created to have conversations. I put a post out today just to market this conversation, and it still seems to be an identity marker. I talk about identity markers a lot in my conversations around inclusive recruitment, where people don't have the confidence to ask questions, and I believe that the majority of people really care about the lives of trans people and would never knowingly want to be disrespectful, other, or misgender, or just say something exclusionary to the community or the people that support the community. And I think it comes from a place of just this lack of education and really stepping into the knowledge. And I think, as I always say, we need to just check ourselves with our fragility a bit, right? And being scared to say the wrong thing, in my opinion, is not an excuse to not start the conversation and ultimately do the work, especially as recruiters. Okay, we work with trans candidates. We need to make sure that we are creating inclusive hiring environments from an agency's perspective, but also our clients are. So I feel it's critical for us to really understand and do the work. I'm going to stop talking.
Before you do stop talking, I just want to say, we were talking before this session, we really want this session to be interactive. What Danielle and Sophie will talk about when we start talking to them and asking about their experiences and the work that they do, most importantly in this space. And I think it's probably worth us kind of signposting that at the beginning of this session. This isn't just a discussion around lived experience. This is, as we like all of our lives to be, something that hopefully those who are working in the D&I space, those who are working in the people space, those who work in the recruitment space can take some tactical and practical tips from to how they can embed inclusion and trans inclusion into their organizations. So with that in mind, we want you to ask questions. we want you to ask questions to our fantastic guests to really help ourselves learn, but everyone else learn as well. So it's a free, it's a safe space for you to ask a question. So sorry, Jo, I've interrupted you. But yeah, I mean, should we hand over to
I was done. I was ready to hand over.
Do it. The baton has been passed. Danielle, Sophie, please introduce yourselves. Tell us what you're about. And take us on that journey.
Okay. So I'm Danielle Wood, and as you can see on the screen, my pronouns are she and her, and I am cisgender.
And I'm Sophie Wood. My pronouns are also she, her, and I'm transgender, binary transgender.
Now binary transgender, yes. Now, quite often it's at this point when we do our sessions and talks that we lose some of our audience in terms of definitions. So we thought it'd be a good place to start and just expand a little bit on that for your audience. So I'm going to hand to Sophie for that one, just to do a little bit of an overview of cisgender, transgender.
Yeah, it's really simple actually. So both words are a Latin stemmed word. So trans is Latin from moving from one place to another. So moving on a journey from point A to point B. And cis is Latin for congruent. So you start at point A, for example, and you stay at point A because no journey is necessary. And also I'd just add that if you identify as non-binary, for example, then you'll be somewhere along that journey, somewhere between point A and point B. But trans and cis, just two Latin stem words. Easy peasy.
Good place to start. So, you said to talk a little bit about our journey. So, Sophie, do you want to start with that
bit? Yeah, sure. So it's always a little bit difficult, isn't it, to start where to start on this one? But I'll give you an overview. So we've been together 32 years this month. We've been married for 22 of those years.
Wow.
Yeah, I know you get less for life, don't you?
But we changed from traditional husband and wife to wife and wife in 2011. And that's when I came out as transgender. Now, I think it's fair to say that journey has not been a smooth one by any stretch of the imagination, but it has taught us an awful lot.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think to kind of sum it up, it kind of turned our worlds upside down. I mean, if you can imagine that you've been living with someone for 19 years and then they realize they're transgender and tell you, and it kind of threw up so many questions for us about our relationship and also what the future was going to look like for both of us. So, up until that point, we'd been living what I would describe as a kind of fairly uneventful, regular kind of life. We met at university, we fell in love, we left university and set up a life together. We lived in suburbia and we both established careers, which ended up in us both working for the police service. And the most impactful aspect of the transition was that we didn't even realise that we fitted into society and had that important sense of belonging in our lives until we didn't. Now, have I lost Sophie completely?
You have lost Sophie, but keep going because I'm yeah.
Carry on. I'll carry on. So from an evolutionary standpoint, if you think about it, as human beings, we're all wired for connection. And belonging kind of satisfies that fundamental need for social interaction, support, affiliation, and it contributes as well to our overall well-being and happiness. So, all of a sudden, we were experiencing rejection from friends and family. People stared at us in the street. Strangers felt it was okay to ridicule us. We'd go to the supermarket and people would go around the aisle several times to have a look and point and giggle. And then at times we even had hostility towards us, especially Sophie. So I think without a doubt, our experiences impacted on both our personal and our professional lives, specifically on our mental health. And also our performance at work. And, whilst the majority of people at work were supportive, there were inevitably those that made life uncomfortable and at times very difficult. And we know on reflection that there was also a very negative impact on our personal development and our career progression as a result of Sophie coming out. Now, you know, what we do now is that we try to help others have a better people experience, you know, and that is what success looks like to us. So that's what we're doing through our business Belonging Base.
Fantastic. Sophie, I'm sorry we lost you there briefly. We've talked about your the journey that, you know, and you started touching on it, the journey that you have been on in terms of your transition, the behavior that you've experienced, which I can only say how sorry I am for that you've actually had to experience that. I mean, having met with you both a couple of times recently, I know you've been doing some work for us at Talent Included with our clients. It's to see how happy you both are, and, you know, it's this great hanging out and spending time with you. I hope I'm not too presumptuous to say that hopefully you are happy and you found happiness, and, you know, thank goodness you kind of went through this transition and you're through the other end. But I think what I'm particularly interested in is, you know, was there a pivotal moment in your transition that you feel has deeply impacted your career or your workplace experience? I mean, Danielle's just touched on it there, but I think it's really important to talk about what impact this does have on people's careers. And career is such an important part of our identity, isn't it? You know, what impact does it have?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk to you about kind of a moment when I was kind of some way through my transition. So I'm working for a company, and so internally I went for an interview for a promotion, and I performed really well at this interview, and I had a really strong application. 2 interviews, in fact, which I really kind of did well in. So well that I came top in the process for both the HR department and the hiring manager separately, according to their scoring systems. But however, and this has been typical of some of my experiences, I didn't actually get the role because the director over the department actually intervened and ensured another candidate actually got offered the role instead of me. Now, had I been given that role, I would have continued with that company and continued working in fraud investigation. But instead, I actually moved out of that company to another one, which was actually advertising its commitment to diversity and inclusion at the time. And they also mentioned in their marketing that they had an LGBT network. So I thought, right, that's probably more of a company for me. So I moved there. And that's where I reconnected with the world of learning development. And I also had the opportunity to lead in that company on their global D&I strategy. It was a FTSE 100 company with over 25,000 employees. Wow. And that in turn led to me being approached by another company to lead up their learning development and diversity inclusion functions. So it's kind of my life, my work career has been very much a series trying to take negative experiences and turn them into kind of positive change, really.
Absolutely. And I think on that, Joe, I mean, I saw you writing some notes there in terms of that kind of EVP. I'm going to pass over to you because I know that you're going to have something to say on that EVP piece.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work that I do with recruitment businesses is to get them to really understand about their recruitment marketing strategy and how they actually weave in ED&I into it. And for some recruitment agencies, that's quite a alien concept for them to do because we've never traditionally done it as an industry. And I kind of like coach them to understand that actually, you know, people who are marginalized, people who have faced bullying or harassment or missed out on promotions and work opportunities and remain underpaid because of their identity, their background, or their circumstance. They are the communities that we need to reassure that stuff's not going to be happening because of the work that our client's doing. So again, it's about like recruiters asking different questions and being really, really inquisitive and not just looking for a statement or a policy on a website because that's just never right. As we all know, it's like, you know, actually saying what 10 things have you done in the last year that have really had an impact on the lived experience of people that work within your business. You know, how are you leveling the playing field and getting those like tangible examples and, you know, making sure that you market your inclusion strategy, but with stuff that people can see. And often we find that if an organization they might not be doing everything for every group or every community or every human and person, but it might be that they're at a certain stage of the journey where they've done a couple of things that have been really impactful. And if you're a person where this is important, the way that you are treated, the way that you are empowered to show up and be yourself at work, it's a good flag that they're an organisation that are also considering other marginalised identities. And I think it's really, really critical that we don't just put stuff online next week saying that we're acknowledging Trans Awareness Week, that we actually state what we're doing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. I think this is I'm going to use the watermelon analogy, Sophie. We call it watermelon employer branding, and that is that you look at the website. The website is slick and it's giving out all the right messages, etc. There's some good values in place, and like Sophie said, she looked at that company website and it said that they had an LGBTQ network, etc. But when you look at the watermelon, that's what you see. You see the green shiny outside and you think, brilliant, it's safe for me to go inside. And then you start scraping off the surface and you start to see the red, and all of a sudden red flags are popping up everywhere. And when you arrive, what the values have said and what the culture that you're expecting just isn't there. And then you're met with a kind of like a disappointment. And what do you do then when you arrive and the culture doesn't align with the values and the behaviors? That's where people be needing to get their house in order before they invite people in. So like you say, it's no good just virtue signaling and putting things on the website and saying we do this, we do that on those dates, but you actually need to be living and breathing that every single day.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about some of those actionable steps, but I think there's a couple of things that I want to just kind of look back on in terms of what you said, Sophie, in that your experience turned you off from wanting to work for that organisation. So you then started to deselect. You saw, what hopefully wasn't a watermelon, but a nice big green beacon light in terms of, I think I'm going to belong there. Yeah. And then the impact you then had on that organisation, not only in terms of the work that you were doing in terms of this L&D space, but also in terms of this ED&I space, the benefit that business got from then employing you, the one who, did make a stand in terms of their inclusion strategy. I think that just goes to show that's an example, a prime example of the work that, Joe does to train us in terms of this is what turns people off and turns people on to want to work for an organisation. And if you have got a talent strategy, I'm sure part of that talent strategy is going to be retention. Attraction and retention, and these are really kind of fundamental things that you can get right. But let's talk about then supporting trans individuals in the workplace. What I don't want to say small. I mean, I want to say small but meaningful actions can organisations take to try and create this supportive environment for trans employees?
Well, I think the first thing to kind of say is that if you're a trans person, you're not an academic subject. So one of the challenges that trans people face is that most people don't know anybody who's trans. So they take all of their information, scanned as it is, from like mainstream media sources, which by its very nature, as you'll be aware, is very othering, and dehumanizing, worryingly at a government level, across party level in the UK. And so that is people's general understanding of perhaps what a trans person is. So they see you as this kind of other entity, which then creates kind of challenges in their minds, in terms of, oh my God, this is going to be really difficult to manage. How are we going to cope? So you're like talking about special needs, for example, to meet the needs of transgender individuals, but it's not that complex. So if you just understand that trans people are just normal human beings, then quite simply, fundamentally, all you need to do is provide a culture and a team environment for the trans person as you would any other person in the company. Because, you know, people talk about the trans community, which, you know, I always question whether there is such a thing as trans community. But if you identify as trans and non-binary, that group of people is just as diverse as the wider society. You know, so I know trans people of all different kind of races and skin colors. I know trans people who are, you know, one sexual orientation and another sexual orientation. I know some really smart trans people. I know some really stupid trans people. I know some really lovely, caring trans people. And I know some really ignorant, hurtful trans people. We're just like everybody else in society. And that's a fundamental thing that people just need to understand if they want to support trans people in the workplace. So don't think of us as other. One of the things that really annoys me is when you kind of, and I've experienced trans awareness training, where, you know, I've sat through an hour and a half of definitions. And it's like when you treat us as this kind of academic phenomenon, and you bring in all this kind of complex language around us, then all you're doing is just furthering that sense of other. It's something to be dealt with, something to be coped with. So if you just fundamentally, as an organisation, if you want to educate people around trans people and the acceptance of trans people, then just listen to trans people's stories, because it's through those stories you actually make human connections. And once you've made human connections with people, you don't consider them to be other. You just consider them to be like everyone else, like a work colleague, for example. Now, my experience in the workplace, and I've worked in the private sector, the public sector, I've always had a great experience with my team, because my team are around me every single day. So whatever kind of, you know, areas of not being comfortable existed, they only exist for about 2 hours or 3 hours, maximum half a day. And then it's just normal human working relationships. And so I have generally a really great positive experience in those teams. But as you kind of go wider from your team to your department to the wider organization, in a lot of cases, then you're starting to get people who've got this kind of, you know, ignorant perception of trans people, sometimes willful ignorance. And so that's when you start to meet kind of negative behaviours, prejudice, discrimination, and all the things that make your life difficult. So I kind of always describe it as concentric circles of hate, really. You know, so people who are in my inner circle just know me as the hopefully excellent human being that Sophie is. So no issues are present, no special considerations need taken at all. And then as you get wider out, then all of a sudden you've got, you know, people might be scared of talking to me because, like you say, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to offend, you know, that person, because they see me as something other than what they are. You know, it's at the very heart of trying to do things with good intent around things like trans awareness and trying to explain from an academic viewpoint, you know, what the trans experience is. It's kind of self-defeating for me.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot actually together, because I think people overcomplicate the entire interaction. Because if you think about it, if I turned up for an interview, okay, you wouldn't even think twice. You just call me Danielle, or you'd say she, her if you're talking to me. But it's the same with somebody that's trans, especially if they've introduced themselves with their pronouns. You just carry on as you would normally. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And if you're unsure about pronouns, you can ask, or you can introduce yourself with yours and ask them what theirs are. Failing that, you just use their name. So, you know, rather than saying, if you're in a meeting, you say, rather than saying she said or he said, you just say, oh, Sophie said, do you remember? And it's really just that simple.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to realise, you know, to get things right for organisations, you don't have, you know, none of the things that we talk about at Belonging Base speak to any kind of specialist diversity and inclusion mystical skill set. We talk about universal principles. So you take the principle of communication, you know, it's established that say 8% of communication is the words that you use, and the other 92% is how those words are positioned and how they're delivered. And it's from the other 92% that you get the intent behind the communication, and then you also have the impact of the communication on the person who's being talked to or written to. So it's like, and that's a universal communication principle. So if Danielle misgenders me because she's recalling a time from our lives before, I'd transitioned, then there's a complete absence of malice in that. It's a genuine error. She's got good intent. So no offense is taken. So we just move on with the conversation. We might even have a chuckle around it. We might just, it's just a kind of quite benign learning experience. But if somebody, addresses me in the workplace and they purposely, and they kind of call me by male pronouns, I will immediately get a sense if malice is there, because you connect on a human level, in our unconscious minds. That's how humans work. So if there's malice present, I'll detect that. And so perhaps I will take offense because I know that the intent is not good, and so that needs to be dealt with as perhaps an attitudinal or behavioral issue. So that's a key message I want to get across is diversity inclusion doesn't exist in isolation as a specialist subject area. People do kind of, the industry grows up, and like most areas of work, people try and create an aura of mystery and specialism around it so that we can be called experts, and so that's fully understandable. But actually, to do the right thing is just to say we're talking about universal attitudes, universal behaviours that exist for everybody in society. So it's not complicated at all, and everybody should have access to that skill set.
They should, and absolutely. And if not, then give you guys a call and you can go in and train them how to do it, which we will talk about. But Jo, I've been seeing you've been writing some notes down. Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of circle back on?
I've just got like so many sound bites here from listening to you both. All the things that you've said. I think what you've said, it really, really has got me really thinking. This whole piece around, people's the pressure that people put them on themselves to really understand, from an academia level, but I need all this information and I need to know what I need to really go deep with the education. And it's like, you just on the surface, you just need to be a inclusive, respectful, decent human who cares about how the things that you say impact other people. And you want to leave everybody that you've communicated with or been near feeling good about their interaction. Sometimes I might speak to people and they might say, but I don't understand. You don't have to just be a good human, just be a decent person and treat everybody with respect and make them feel good about being in your presence. So that really kind of makes sense. And I think maybe we as a society, we're getting educated through mainstream media who have got the most crooked lens on all marginalized groups, in particular trans people, and that's the shocking bit, isn't it? I think that's maybe why there is, if we didn't have education on trans people through the Daily Mail, then Sophie, Danielle, your work would probably be a heck of a lot easier. But it's almost like there's a lot of work, there's a lot of misunderstanding and preconceived ideas to unpick. Right? Maybe that's why everybody feels like it's such a curiosity and it's so complex, because they've been told that it is. When you say that, Sophie, it's that easy.
Yeah, right? And it is. And you talk about things like mainstream media there, and what you never hear in mainstream media are trans voices, authentic trans voices, actually kind of giving a trans perspective on things. Even the much lauded, what I consider to be pseudoscience-led cast review, is kind of absent from, a full consultation with the very people who are the subject of the academic report, which is any other walk of life, you think that's absolutely crazy, you know. But people don't question it because it's directed at this minority of people that, you know, and that's one of our challenges, is the minority of our minority. So, you know, the majority of people never kind of meet trans people knowingly, and so they never have these considerations in their life. But there's another aspect of all of this as well, and that is, I had a really great conversation with some fellow trans and non-binary people. Gosh, it was last year now, wasn't it? And we were working together to assist the CIPD to produce some practical guidance for supporting trans and non-binary people in the workplace. And we had some great conversations in that space. And, you know, and not a lot of people recognise that there's a concerted, kind of coordinated, well-funded effort to do damage to trans people in many countries around the world. You know, people who are, generally speaking, politically kind of, you know, right-wing aligned, you know, who have kind of intolerance of minority groups at their kind of heart. But they're very wealthy, very powerful people, and they influence things like our media, you know, through the people that own them. And so they really influence the general societal perception of particularly, you know, trans people, to the exclusion of anybody hearing, you know, what trans people might have to say about it, which is absolutely crazy. And we're just individuals trying to get on with our lives. So we're not organised. We haven't got a, you know, a consolidated response, you know, or a kind of huge community strategy to say, oh, this is how we need to react to this. We're just kind of having this stuff happen to us.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things I'd just like to point out there is that, you know, I've known Sophie a long time. We've been together 32 years. And as we said, she didn't come out until 19 years in. And I think what people forget is they've known that person for all that time previously. That person is still the same person with the same hopes, values, fears, you know, all of that kind of stuff. They're just coming now in a different packaging, you know, and the fact that people really struggle with that is something I find hard, because it is the same person. So why would you wake up tomorrow and treat them completely differently because they look different? Why would you do that? Because that's what's happened as far as you're concerned as an outsider, as a third party individual. They just look different. So yeah, I find it really, really hard. You know, at the end of the day, Sophie always talks about the fact that, you know, at the end of the day, we're all just human beings, just trying to get on and live our lives.
I love that you bring it back to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Danielle and I, you know, often have conversations which can end up a bit challenging. So Danielle might kind of say, we were watching something about, I don't know, toxic masculinity on, I don't know, a documentary or on the news. And Danielle will go, did you ever kind of think like that and say these kind of things when you were growing up? And I kind of, you know, turn around and say, well, yeah, you do realize I was never that person, you know. You know, I've always been who I am now. I was just kind of didn't have the awareness, the self-reflection skills. I didn't have the context in wider society to refer to. Didn't have the vocabulary to describe anything that was going on internally. But I'm still exactly the same person. So I've never been that male persona, you know, even though I was perceived a male at that time.
So it's fascinating, isn't it? Talk to us about the work that you do. Talk to us about setting up Belonging Base and what you help your clients with.
Okay, do you want me to cover this one, Sophie?
Yeah, you start us off there.
I'll start us off there. Okay. Right. Okay. So basically, when we decided to set the business up, it was because we came to a point where we thought that we wanted to start doing something more meaningful. And we started on the principles that we talked about today, you know, on the principles that we believe that those human-to-human connections are really pivotal in creating true inclusivity at work. So we started looking at lots of different areas, and now we've kind of focused down on 3 key areas where we help our clients. So the first one is through raising awareness. So depending on what stage of the journey a company is at with their inclusivity, we do talks, and they're meant to be thought-provoking talks. So we can start off with things like gaining buy-in for inclusion and belonging, why it's important to business success, or we do the more personal awareness, like all things trans, ask anything, which gives people that opportunity we've been talking about to meet somebody trans and learn about their experiences in a safe space. And we let them ask anything they want to, so that they can really drill down and make those connections. But we also share video content ourselves, so that we can raise awareness that way. But we both have passion projects. So Sophie's passion area is mental health awareness, because it's an area that impacts all human beings, all of us. But for some reason, it's still hiding in the shadows. And so she's working on a daily basis to bring that more to light, so that we can have more of those real, open, and meaningful conversations and connections. So she does an awful lot of work around mental health awareness. And I'm putting together a group coaching program, which I'm launching next year, which hits the other area which we feel is untapped in terms of inclusion and belonging at work. And that's where we talked about the when you arrive in an organization and the experience is that you have is predominantly around the manager and the team that you're part of. So the group coaching program is going to be called The Memorable Manager, and it will help people managers become more self-aware and understand the impact that they have on others, and help them to understand how to build those safe spaces, those where there's psychological safety, so where people feel they're part of something, so they can really be the best version of themselves. Because we went through long periods of time where we just kind of stayed in that survival mode because we felt we didn't belong. So it's about making those managers much more capable of doing that in their workplaces. So raising awareness, mental health, and the memorable manager are the key 3 focus areas at the moment.
I think one of the big drivers when we were setting up was because we've had this personal lived experience, and as Danielle mentioned, we both worked in the field of D&I, both in the public sector in the UK and corporate globally. And now I'm a trans person who talks to people about my experience, and I'm having the same conversations I had when I started being a trans person, talking about trans issues over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so there's a big realization that the pendulum hasn't really swung perhaps as much as it should have done over that time. And so one of the lessons we've learned from our working experience is that there's a lot of what I like to call kind of like painting by numbers D&I out there, which is, the typical, we've got our yearly calendar and we'll celebrate International Men's Day, International Women's Day, and Pride Month and Black History Month. And that's all, well and good. And some really great work happens in those spaces. But what tends to happen is that those D&I kind of strategies, they speak to the minority, about 10, 15% part of a company that really get diversity inclusion. And really buy into it. What it doesn't do is it doesn't speak to the majority of the working population who really don't give a damn about it. And the whole point of a successful D&I strategy in my eyes is to actually change the hearts and minds of those people who really don't care. And because we never address that majority, that's why we think the pendulum doesn't really move as much as it should do. So by taking this universal approach to behaviours in the workplace that we all have access to, then we're hoping to bring everybody on that learning journey with us. So, for example, when I talk about mental health, it's an important message that everybody has mental health. And if you look at the outcomes of talking about mental health and those kind of learning programs, what you're trying to do is change the way that people think, feel, and behave towards each other, and the way people turn up for each other in the workplace, which is less transactional and more meaningful on a human connection level. And ultimately, that's what you're trying to achieve with D&I education as well. But by focusing on an area where everybody can get involved, then we're hoping that that's going to have a kind of wider impact within business populations rather than just the repetitive echo chamber that D&I tends to operate in.
Yeah, I completely agree. Oh, thank you both so much for joining us. Jo, have you got any closing comments that you want to add?
I couldn't agree more with what you both said, but Sophie, what you just said then, it's absolutely a lot of the time a lot of our efforts are preaching to the converted, the people that show up to the lunch and learns and the cultural awareness days and the talks and whatever event style initiatives. They're the people that are impacted by a lack of inclusion. And I think it's something that Sally and I talk a lot about in our work, is this change, educating and winning the hearts and minds of people who can turn the dial, the people that perhaps haven't ever faced a barrier or been excluded because of the background, identity or circumstances. Yeah. And by that very nature of being somebody who isn't impacted, they tend to hold a bit more authority and a bit more power and have the more ability to change things for others. And I think it's a strategy and a philosophy that I really, really buy into. And if I've taken anything away, I've taken loads away from this conversation. I've got a page full of one-liners. If I quote them, I will definitely credit you both. But it's just the way that you simplify this conversation and you make it, I know it's the most overused word, safe space, but I do think I can get that sense of this doesn't have to be complicated, folks. It's about us communicating, listening, and agreeing to be good human beings. And I think sometimes we can overcomplicate things a bit too much. And it's about that human to human connection. Thank you so much. I've loved it. I wish we could have another hour.
No, for those of you who do want another hour with the lovely Sophie and Danielle, please get in touch with them. I know that they'll be putting some free resources on this stream, some links to some free resources, but get in touch with them. Like I said, they've done some work for some of our clients at Talent Included. It's been really, really well received. I echo Jo's message in terms of the simplification of this subject, has such an impact. But also, how we all as managers, and we're seeing the world of leadership evolve before our very eyes, and the skills that we need to stay current, and the skills that we're going to need to be able to retain the top talent in our organizations, which is something we're all striving for. It starts with this, doesn't it? Actually, let's just be human beings. Let's treat others as human beings. Let's see how we can get the best out of people. I think is where we need to start. So thank you for sharing your stories. Can I say happy Trans Week? Is that a thing? Can I say, I'm just here to celebrate and to bring awareness.
I think it's a week of awareness more than celebration.
Okay, well, I'm still celebrating, but
it ends on the 20th of November, which is Trans Remembrance Day. So it ends on a very kind of somber tone because we kind of pay tribute to all the people who've lost their lives over the previous 12 months. So that's what that day is all about.
And that's the reality, right? Of us not coming together and creating inclusion, right, for everybody.
Exactly. But please do get in touch. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's great just to hang out with you. So thank you so much. And let's keep this conversation going for sure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.